Paul, that was wonderful. And Alan, too, thank you both. Challenge to follow such interesting talks. Alan, I did want to say one thing. At MIT, we actually do love the quote that, that imagination is worth more than knowledge. So that's actually very much the way we roll here. The work that I want to talk about now is a study that we've recently done in my group, looking at what's age appropriate in apps for kids age 3 to 6. And the website is right. The program mentions that Jane Gould was involved in this, and Jane has moved on to other things, and so I'm going to sort of summarize the work that we've been doing. Just to give you a sense of the context of this, let me see my, hold on a second, I'm just waiting for my, for some reason, oh, let me get this working again, hold on. So it worked when I tested it this morning, but now it's not switching, so hang on one second. It's still not. All right, hold on. Sorry about this. Oh, got it. I think I got it. Bizarre. So I have to say, Apollo, I was really impressed with the way you sort of dealt with the technology not working. It's happened to me before, too, and so I'm just trying to figure out now why my slides aren't changing. Yeah, OK, great. So sorry about that small delay. Anyway, the context for this, of course, is that suddenly computing has gone mobile. In the last few years, suddenly we have all carrying around in our pockets computers that now do what used to obviously be done only by big desktop machines. And the very first thing that we started noticing when that happened is how interested kids, well, kids were always interested in computers, but suddenly when they could actually put them in their hands, how totally compelling both tablets and cell phones are to young kids. And they started appearing to be using them a lot. There's immediately, of course, when that happens, people start worrying that this is going to be terrible, that kids are suddenly going to get addicted to their computers, to their mobile devices. I want to point out just in that context that the first person who worried about new technology ruining us was Socrates, who worried that the advent of writing was going to destroy memory. He honestly did. He honestly did. And so so whenever there's alarm about new technology, and I share some of it, but I always try to remember that so that I'm not looking at it in the context of, oh, it must be, therefore it must be bad. Anyway, so the question is, kids are interested in these tablets. Parents, of course, see that their kids are interested, and they start wanting to buy apps for them. And developers figure out, oh, there's a lot of money to be made in selling apps to parents for their kids. And so clearly there's big business here. But that raises, and the developers, of course, figure out the best way to sell apps to parents is to promise that they're good for their kids, that they are going to lead to their intellectual or social or moral development. And so that's the way many apps are packaged. Some are packaged just as entertainment, but many are packaged as improving their children's development. And so that's the context in which parents are looking at these things and trying to figure out what's worthwhile. Go the right way. The interesting thing about this, and I've actually been doing games for kids for about 20 years, is that something interesting coincided, and I think it's purely coincidence, but with the rise of the personal computer, which is in the mid-'80s, coincides with a change in the way society as a whole has tended to look at education. And maybe one of the things that triggers that change was the study A Nation at Risk, which was published in 1983. But for whatever reason, somehow over the last 25 years or so, we have put more and more emphasis on children spending more and more time in school. In effect, over that same period, around the same time that the personal computer came out, we started making school days longer. We started making kindergarten longer. We started making preschool longer. There are lots of good reasons for that. But the other thing that we did, not just making it longer, is we started to make it more instructional. So through most of the 20th century, we believed that the appropriate job of childhood was play. And we believed that right through kindergarten and even into the early grades, first and second grade, there was a fair amount of play that was going on. And that's what kindergarten was about play. But sometime around 25 years ago, we started thinking that maybe it was important to begin drilling our kids on arithmetic, on alphabet, at earlier and earlier ages. And so the domains that previously looked like play are starting to look more and more like what we think of school as being, or what we think school should be. And so that's been sort of the background for education roughly during the same time that we've seen the rise of personal computing. And that contrasts with the notion of childhood as sort of preparation sort of for future learning, which is really what it was through most of the 20th century. So over the last few decades, we've seen more formal schooling for kindergarten and preschool. We're even seeing testing in kindergarten now. We're seeing homework in kindergarten now. That's become the mode. And that's sort of the background against which most apps are sort of offering themselves to parents. They're part of that environment. Well, if you look at the studies, there are some very good longitudinal studies over the same period of time in which the same assessments are used across the population of American kids. And over that same period of time, we've seen some interesting changes in the population. We've seen a big decline in empathy. We've also seen a significant measurable decline in creativity. And both of these are in consistent evaluation. So it's the same set of standards being used over time. We've seen a decline in empathy and evaluation. We've seen big increases in anxiety in younger children, and mental disorders in children, in school-age children. Another study that recently came out has compared prescriptions of ADHD medicine by state against when they institute standardized testing. And it seems pretty reliable that after a state institutes standardized testing, prescriptions for ADHD medication go up. I mean, the theory is that maybe the schools are getting more and more anxious about their kids' performance, and therefore they're the ones who are suggesting to parents that there are more and more problems with ADHD. So I just mentioned that. I realize we're very far away from the issue of apps for 3 to 6-year-olds. But I think it's really important to think about the context in which we have this conversation. So the assumption embedded in all, by the way, I just pulled this off the web. This is from a website of a kindergarten that advertises itself as being academically rigorous. But the assumption, obviously, is that kids at an earlier and earlier age need more school-like experiences. When I think what this data is really showing us, and there's lots of other data that sort of backs it up, is that what our kids now have is increasingly a play deficit. That once upon a time, in the early, not once upon a time, in reality, in the early 20th century, kids had a lot, and when I talk to my cohort, most of us remember at roughly around age 8 being set off in the world and being allowed to go freely explore. And nowadays, more and more of children's time is spent in play dates, in organized activities, in activities run by adults. Very different from an environment in which kids are really exploring. And that in fact, as I said, that the kids are suffering from this deficit of play. The issue that I want to argue is not just that children need play for their social and emotional development, but actually that they learn better. That actually it's through play that they actually learn better. And so in our research we came upon a number of studies which compared young children, the children in the age that we're talking about, age 3 to 6, in situations with play versus situations with instruction. And just to give one example, there was a study done at Berkeley in which kids were shown an object, and the person who shows it in one version says, I don't know how this works. Let me see. And they push a button and it makes noise, and they hand it to the kid, and the kid starts looking at it and pushing the buttons and discovering that there's all these different ways of making interesting noise from the device. The other group in the same study is shown the device, and the person says, here's how this device works. And you push this button, it does this thing. And that's it. In other words, they instruct rather than acting confused. And in the situation in which, and by the way, there's a similar study at MIT, and there's all other studies that have done similar things. And in all those studies, in the situation in which the kid is instructed about how to use the device, they do the thing they're instructed to do, and they go no further. In the situations in which the kid is shown something by the adult who acts a little bit confused by it and then hands it off to the kid begins exploring the thing and trying to figure out how it works and discovers all sorts of things about the device, things that they did not discover when they were instructed in its use. I mean, another comparable study was one in which, this is one that Seymour Papert quotes, in which there's two groups of children. One are given a chance to actually sort of play with some odd hardware, and another one in which they're instructed in how to use the hardware. In both cases, they're then given a challenge which requires building something with that hardware. The one in which they've been instructed, they take much longer to figure it out than the ones who've actually just played with the device. And so the point here is that it is really through play that kids are doing most of their learning. And the interesting thing to me is that in studies worldwide, anthropologists actually look at play in all sorts of different cultural settings, including hunter-gatherer societies, agricultural societies, and in most societies that they study in which children are largely sort of set free from the very beginning and left to their own devices until adulthood, what they spend most of their time doing at play is figuring out how the world works. They spend that time figuring out how to be adults, and they do it by playing at being adults. And they do it with each other, they teach each other, they don't need much adult intervention to do it. In other words, that's how they discover the world. And they are actually, through that process, they're actually mastering adulthood through their play. So it makes sense to me that in this world where part of the tools of adult life include computers, that it's totally natural that children should want to master the tools of adulthood in our culture, and that they should want to figure out how to use computers. They should want to play with them. In fact, I'd probably argue that if you gave a kid your cell phone with all the apps that you use, they would figure out lots of interesting things. I think that let a kid play with a spreadsheet for a while, figure out what they can find with that. They may get bored with it quickly. And in fact, there was a study in which, this is anecdotal, this is a study of one, but it was interesting to me. Someone let their kid have a tablet to do whatever they wanted to without any parental control whatsoever. The kid was totally hooked on it for about 2 weeks, and then it was under the bed for 6 weeks while they moved on to something else. Eventually, it was resurrected again. But the point was, to me, that behavior is just the typical behavior of children sort of finding things in the world, playing with them, figuring out how they work, moving on when they're ready for something else. So what does that say more specifically about apps, though? Let me go back in the right direction here. I think what we found from the research was that instead of parents spending all this energy looking for apps that are somehow going to accelerate schooling, that are going to try to do first grade while they're in preschool or second grade while they're in kindergarten, that parents ought to be just looking for things that their children find entertaining and interesting and amusing, but primarily that their children can do with them. Because what we're really not saying in this is that parents have no role and that they should get out of the way. Even though I'm saying that parents should feel a tremendous amount of freedom and that they should let their kids explore, we're not saying that parents should get out of the way, because the other interesting research that we found, we looked at the cases of kids who come to school not well prepared. We looked at the children who come with deficits. And the primary predictors of a kid not doing well in school is if they come to school with a deficit in numeracy and in executive function, I mean, literacy is also important, but the two things that seem to be the greatest predictors are deficits in numeracy and executive function. And then we looked at the programs that actually, the good news is there are actually a handful of programs out there that within a single year of preschool can help young children overcome those deficits in both numeracy and executive function. And the interesting thing about those programs is that they don't accelerate traditional schooling. They don't try to push them ahead with arithmetic, with phonetics. What they do is they try to replicate what they see happening in more stable and intact families. And so, in fact, what kids need to succeed is not this kind of accelerated learning brought to you by experts who deliver it on computers, but rather what they need is the stuff that by and large parents are already doing. That in fact, most parents are, through the normal play that they do with their children, are actually doing the things that their kids need, which is part of why we're saying to parents, just relax. That the things that parents are doing normally with their kids that are so helpful for them are things like playing games where you have to count, like Parcheesi or Candyland or Chutes and Ladders. And so simply playing those games together. That in fact, that's where kids begin to develop numeracy, is through the modeling that they do through simple counting activities that they normally do with their parents. That literacy comes quite clearly from simply having a parent sit with you and read to you. Again, it's things that parents already know how to do. That executive function comes, I should look at my list so I'm not just, forgive me for, I'm still not used to this device going in the right direction. That it comes from planning, from doing puzzles together, from going out in the world together, from making up stories together, from the very behaviors that parents sort of naturally and comfortably do with their kids. That's where they're getting the stuff that they need. Now that may not sound on some level I realize that may sound, well, of course. But the point is that we're living in a context in which parents are continually being told that they're not good enough, that they're not smart enough, that they need to listen to an expert to figure out what they're doing, that in fact, what they really need to do is do more of what they're most comfortable with. And the reason I mention this is because I was somewhat hesitant to start suggesting what things are appropriate in apps for fear that people would start saying, oh, I've got to go do that, when in fact, we really have to change the culture to one in which parents are much more trusting of their own skills. That said, we did try to look at what were the things in apps that were most age appropriate. So that as I'm about to sort of toggle into that and talking about those things, I wanted to set this context, not of one that's saying you must rush out and get this stuff for your kids, but rather reinforcing your sense that the things that you're doing as parents, the things that parents are doing with their kids are the right things, and here are the apps that sort of replicate that. I think it goes without saying that their kids' use of apps should not be all the time, but that's also true of any other activity, that no activity done obsessively is good for kids. That everything is done in balance, but but again, that's something we naturally know. We don't really need experts to tell us that. So let me just, having sort of set the stage, let me show you a couple apps that I think do show the kinds of activities that actually are appropriate for this age group. Let me open this one first. Now, none of this is meant to be an endorsement. Oh, let me plug in I forgot to plug in the audio here. Hang on. There is an audio cord here. Yep. None of these, I'm not endorsing any particular product. I'm doing this just as a way of showing off certain features. Anyone know this game, Toca Band? Okay, a few of you do. So this is the whole thing. So let me see. That's all I get. Notice no instructions, right? I just get this world. So if I'm a kid, I'm just going to grab this guy and go.
On the mark. Stick figure. Toca Band, yo. We rockin' it. We in the house now. To the ladies. To the fellas. Get down. Stick figure. Took a banjo. We rockin' it.
There are a lot of these
We in the
guys
house
here,
now.
and I don't know what any of them do.
To the ladies. To the fellas. Get down. On the horn. Stick figure.
So I can just keep moving them around endlessly.
Took a banjo. We rockin' it. We in the house now.
I can change them.
To the fellas. Get down. On the horn. Stick figure.
I kind of like her better.
Took a banjo.
Anyway,
We rockin' it.
so what's a kid doing with this? First of all, they're figuring it out for themselves. Let me, maybe I should dance a little. I'm sort of torn between wanting to dance and wanting to keep talking. So forgive me if I stop for just a second. Let me go back to my presentation. Anyway, that's a world in which the kid can endlessly explore, but there's interesting things about that. For example, when you move those characters around, their rhythms change. And so there's all sorts of interactions that can be sort of discovered by the kid playing with that. And they're figuring out the systems for themselves. You'll notice that never did the application tell kids what to do. Remember the story about the kid being instructed versus being able to just discover it for themselves. So I think that probably captures better than any of the other one, any of sort of the larger ethos in which I think we should be thinking about what our kids are doing in play. But let me just show a couple other examples. I realize on some level less, in some ways not quite as good, but still interesting. So Dr. Panda's Beauty Salon, here we're going to go into a second. Dr. Panda is a series of games that are all about the real world, about kids' lives. And that's why I actually bring this one out. This one's a little bit, this one also doesn't give you any instructions. It is a little bit more directed though. So like if I grab the cow, goes in the beauty salon, it sort of tells me what it wants me to do, but I still have to sort of figure it out for myself. I'm gonna click on this, and then I can sort of do the nails, see? Now, by the way, just in case you're worried, because I'm showing a beauty salon, this is totally non-gendered. The characters appear male and female. It's not all about heteronormative notions of beauty. One of the things you do is clip nose hairs. But what it's really about is what I mentioned in there earlier about the studies of children around the world. It's really about giving children chances to explore real adult activities. The things that are interesting to them, in this case, grooming is really what it's about. But the point is that they explore, it doesn't mean that they have to explore it in a kind of a grim, realistic way. They're exploring it in the context of animals. Obviously, it's quite silly, but it's still silly in the service of understanding the real world, the adult world. I think that's worth, and by the way, I haven't really mentioned it, I got into this business doing games around math. I love math. But I really do think that if I had a 3 to 6-year-old, I'd be much more concerned with them doing this than with them doing anything beyond the simple counting stuff that I mentioned. I'd much rather them doing this than doing math drills with their parents. This is much more about what children this age need. One last example. Let me find the one I was looking for. Oh, it's about narrators. Let me bring up good old Grover. So many of you, I read this book to my kids before there were ebooks. The monster at the end of this book. How many people know this book?
What is this?
Oh, good. Everyone knows this book. How many of you have seen the app before? Okay, so a lot of you have seen the app. So the only reason I mentioned this app,
starring.
she said I have 5 minutes. I knew that.
Grover.
Oh, for Q&A. Okay. Anyway, it's not a perfect ebook because let me tell you what's wrong with it. Grover reads it to you at his pace. And so you have to watch it at Grover's pace. It's like a video.
Would you like
On the
to
one
read
hand,
a
he
good
does
book
read it
with
to
me?
you, and he does show you. He does show you the words. But my problem with him, I'm going to unplug Grover actually for the moment. My problem with him reading to you is that, to me, reading the really critical thing about reading is that you are in control of time. And so I think there are a lot of other ebooks that are better in which you as the parent actually controls when, or the child controls when the page gets turned. But the good thing about this one, the reason I actually mentioned this one, is that Grover is an unreliable narrator. That Grover, let me go back to this, that what Grover is telling you not to go forward in the book. Grover is anxious about the monster at the end of the book, and in fact, you, the reader, are smart. You know that Grover is wrong, and so you keep exploring. My point about the unreliable narrator goes all the way back to the study I mentioned where the adult appeared confused about something. Studies have shown, even in infants, that their attention is greater to something when the adult who's involved appears confused or in the same position as they are. And that I think with apps, too many apps come in where the narrator says, now click on this. Good job, right? You've all seen that kind of thing. That's, Grover is sort of saying, Grover is confused. Grover doesn't know what's going on. Grover empowers the child to figure it out for themselves, to be smarter than Grover. I mean, I don't know about you, but my goal for my children was that they would be smarter than me. Not that they would listen to everything I said, that they would be smarter and better than me. And so, I know I'm getting kind of broad there, but my point is that even at the level of an app, we should be looking for opportunities for our kids to be smarter, better than we, the app designers, are. So with that, I think I'll just turn over questions and answers. Yes. Yeah.
Early in your discussion.
Yeah.
Early in your discussion, you said that we should do apps that encourage kids and parents to do stuff together. But practically speaking, a lot of the companies that do apps invested a lot in parental tools so parents could see what kids did in the app to bring them in. And what kids want is they want their parents to watch or just let them do it. So can you speak a little bit more about how you do a good job of that?
Yeah. I think you better ask yourself why you're giving this parental information, this information to parents. I think if we have a conscious, again, this is opinion, but it's based on this literature, is that we're doing our parents a disservice if we make them anxious about their own kids' development. And I think a lot of this stuff where we're telling parents, look at this stuff to see how your kid is doing, we're sort of increasing the anxiety. We're increasing their sense that their kid's performance is important in this app. So I think that the best parental information I can think of is stuff that just says, do this with your kid. Do this with them. This is why they would really rather do it with you than do it alone. Because at this age, kids would rather play with their parents. And so I really think we should be doing more of that. I think there's nothing wrong with giving information that says this stuff is developmentally appropriate and all that. I just think that selling it to parents as if the kid's going to play with the app and then we're going to instruct you as a parent as to how to be a better parent, I think is really sort of problematic. So I don't know if I answered that right, but there's no right answer yet.
But I do think it's a waste to spend all this time doing reporting with parents, never look at it. And what you really want is something that your kid grabs you and goes, look what I just did.
Yeah, exactly. You said it.
It fail because it's funny when it fails.
Right. You said it better than I could have, so thank you.
You've done some research showing for the 6 and under age, but have you found that it's applicable for maybe the 7+ or 7 to 12 range?
Well, so we didn't look. So the question was, is it applicable older? I didn't look, in this study, we didn't look at that, and I don't want to sort of say as if we looked at evidence of that, but I would say based on my other work, I think it's really applicable for most ages. I think there's a whole other talk that I give about how faulty our notion that our schools are, not that our schools aren't failing our kids in some ways, not that, I think that there's ways in which school is horrible, so I don't want to undersell. But the thing we worry about, that where our kids are not doing well on these standardized tests that we're looking at, most of that, there's evidence that that's sort of a flawed model, that we're actually looking at the wrong data there. And so I do think that actually even at older ages, we're suffering from the play deficit. A lot of this literature about the declines in creativity and the declines in empathy apply across the whole age range. So yeah, I'm all for more play at every age, including you all. Yeah.
So one of your messages is trust parents and to imbue parents with this trust that your judgment is what is good. To what extent should we do we apply that to kids? Do you see a high correlation between things that you like in games and, say, popularity with kids? Like, oh, my kid likes this, therefore it's a good choice that they've made. Are there things that you see that like set off red flags where you're like, oh, that child is actually making a poor choice? There are like a few things that like that you would use to like supersede your kid and say like, don't make, like, that's not the app.
Yeah. No, first of all, I think, kids will pick stuff because they're popular. I mean, not every moment kids are sort of maximizing, the value of every moment. Obviously, they will play a game because their friends play it. They may do stuff that they find boring. But I think that but I think we make a mistake if we're trying to turn every moment into sort of be efficient learners. That's also problematic. So if kids should have the freedom to just go down dead ends. I can remember as a child spending a Saturday morning watching TV and then feeling kind of, that wasn't really very good. That was kind of a waste of my time. That was when I learned that. I learned that when I wasted a Saturday morning watching TV. I didn't learn it because my parents said TV isn't good for you. And so I think it's even okay if kids find themselves sort of doing something that ends up being a little boring or useless. That's part of what childhood is all about. Now, I mean, obviously, I think there are things that have bad values. I mean, I think, if there are things that are sexist, there are things that are racist that are out there in the world that kids get exposed to. I think the best thing a parent can do is sit with them and talk about it. Talk about what their concerns are about it, rather than sort of assume that there's some magic filter by which they can sort of prevent their kids from ever being exposed to that stuff. Yeah.
Hello. I seem to see an irony that there's a lot of talk about apps that are essentially couch potatoes for kids.
Yeah.
Where they're really focused, and then we have this perfect example here of a classic where the family is having a great time together.
Yeah.
So do you have an example of apps where it is motivating and complementing real life experiences, where it's an in-person social interaction as opposed to a purely solitary stare at the screen moment?
Yeah, and I didn't get far enough into talking about the things that I think should be, I mean, the wonderful thing about tablets and phones is you can actually do turn-based play on them. You can actually pass the app, the device around. And there isn't enough turn-based play for young kids yet. There should be more. I mean, it'd be a no-brainer. And it can be the same thing. I play Scrabble against my tablet, but I can also play it, passing it back and forth to someone. It should really be a no-brainer that anything that we do for kids ought to have the mode in which it's passing back and forth, as well as the sort of the sit by, entertain, amuse yourself mode. By the way, though, if you think about a kid sitting with a book amusing themselves, no one would be alarmed if they saw a kid sitting on a couch amusing themselves with a book. I think we should say the same thing about apps. If a kid is sort of engaged with an interactive app by themselves, it doesn't mean that they're wasting time necessarily. Again, chances are if they find it boring, they'll stop. Yes. Yeah.
How important and how effective is a reward system when it comes to apps and games in general?
Yeah, so how effective is a reward system? So I think this is sort of generally true about games, and so and I wish I had more time. I would give you my rant against gamification. Success is its own reward. Success is always its own reward. Think about how gratified you were by that performance of Toka Band there. Did you need someone to say, good job, you put that in the right place? You got 50 points for doing that? I don't mean to say that you can't have, it is fun in a game when the little sparkly lights go off and bells ding and stuff like that. But all that's doing is sort of giving a sort of an audible signal that's ratifying what you're already feeling about success. So I think generally putting rewards in games, we know there's tons of research that shows that extrinsic rewards devalue the activity. That if you start giving kids rewards for something, they will only do it for the reward. They will see the activity as being worthless other than for the reward. If I pay you to brush your teeth, you will only brush your teeth when I pay you. You will not understand the value of brushing your teeth. It's that simple. And I think, and good games know that. In fact, if you're a game designer, let me just tell you one of my rules is always make failure interesting. Because make failure rewarding. They're going to spend much more time in failure, and you want to encourage them to keep failing until they get it right. And so I'm much more interested in games that reward failure than games that reward success. So yes, in fact.
I had a question about the Common Core. You
Yeah.
mentioned stress and anxiety
Yeah.
because of standardized tests. And
Yeah.
I just see in the media a lot of anxiety about how teachers are going to interpret the Common
Yeah.
Core.
So, yeah, just quickly, the Common Core itself, again, I'm partly in the realm of opinion here. The Common Core itself is simply a set of standards. And in fact, for most states, the Common Core are an improvement on the previous standards. They put much more emphasis on experiential learning. The problem is that our larger system is all built around tests. And we sort of, particularly over the last 15, 20 years, we've evolved a system where it's all high stakes. And so that means that we take some reasonably good standards, even like the Common Core, and then we test on them. And the tests are never as good as the standards are themselves. And so we're now starting, so the anxiety is about the tests. And people call it the Common Core, but the real problem is the degree to which we're doing these kinds of summative, high stakes tests, which are high stakes for both the kids and the teachers. And so long as we do that, the Common Core will be badly implemented. It'll be turned into drill, which is not what it's trying to be. So, and like most of the education debate, it's sort of this mix of good values of wanting all kids to succeed, and then sort of the wrong solution for that problem in terms of trying to come up with a standardized, efficient way, rather than the kind of messy, creative way that we actually learn. Do you want me to stop? One more, okay.
I'd like to hear your rant against gamification.
Well, there's a workshop. Okay, there's a workshop. So I'm good. I'll do it anytime. I'll come and find me during a meal. I mean, the short of it, a lot of it is about this idea about extrinsic rewards and the notion that we can trick somebody. I think it's highly fascistic to think that we can trick people into doing things they don't want to do by Pavlovian means. I mean, when I say it that way, no one agrees with that, right? We should never trick someone to do something they don't want to do by Pavlovian means, right? I think most people would agree. That's what gamification really is. So, thanks very much.